everyone hear me all right? We're delighted to have 4 judges from Oklahoma District Court with us here today. And they've each been assigned in advance some questions to be thinking about. But I told them, just as they have given me great liberality in the courtroom, I'm going to give them great liberality to wander judiciously in answering the questions. So immediately to my right is the Honorable Patricia Parrish, and then to her right, the Honorable Jerry Bass. To Judge Bass's right, the Honorable Cindy Trong, and then to Cindy's right, the Honorable Kenneth Stoner. And they'll each talk a little bit about the dockets that they typically have. But on the next page, page 5, you'll see their questions and an opportunity for you to take microscopic notes in that small area that we've given to you. So we'll begin to I just want to prime the mental pump a little bit and ask you, when you hear the word justice, some things come to mind. Maybe some images, maybe an experience that you had. It might be, as Myrna was suggesting, the scales of justice being held by Lady Justice. Or you might remember that time you didn't get the grade you deserved for some reason in elementary school. So it's a visceral reaction many times for us, an emotional reaction to talk about justice, especially if we feel justice has been denied either to us or to someone we care greatly about. I mentioned at the outset of the meeting that some people don't think of the connection between justice and ethics. And I think all of our panelists will address that in one way or another. But there clearly is a very close association between justice, fairness, and ethics, and in particular difficult situations that are presented to our judges. I've never served as an official judge. I've been a mock trial judge, but you know, when you're presented with a thorny dilemma, how do you make the decision? It's a very challenging thing, particularly when you're on the bench, often in the public eye. It's a challenge for them. So I commend to you their biographies. They're all very accomplished professionals and very well-respected judges on the bench. So Judge Parrish, I'm going to start with you. And I've warned them in advance that I will gong them at the conclusion of their allocated time, not to take personal offense. So over the years, I've been aware, and those that read the newspapers probably are aware, that you've been involved in some cases that involve significant public controversies with strong opinions on both sides, often voiced through the media. So how do you and how should we, the rest of us that aren't judges, how do you approach sharp disagreements where there's differing values of right and wrong? And is that decision-making process different for a judge than it would be for us in our everyday lives?
Can you all hear me? Before I have the answer the question, I want to take a personal point of privilege, if I could. Since we're speaking about justice today, we have our newest Supreme Court Justice that has joined us today. That's Judge Richard Darby. And I just want to acknowledge him because he's probably more fit to be up here. Well, I know he's more fit to be up here than I am.
Very good.
The other thing I want to say is I have to leave at 12:30, so pardon me when I probably fall down as I'm walking off the stage at 12:30, but I'm sorry, I had something come up that I have to be out by 1. And the question here has to do with public cases that we all receive. If you're on the bench, a member of the judiciary, sooner or later you're going to get that public case that you just cringed. As a matter of fact, it's sort of a joke around the courthouse. If we see something on the nightly news, we immediately get into the office and pull up OSCN to see if we were fortunate or unfortunate enough to be assigned the case. Some of the cases that I have handled that involved issues that were particularly important to the public generally have to do with cases that do with the constitutionality of laws. They may be a case that has to do with an open records request on a very hot topic type issue. I've handled an election contest, which really turned out not to be that big of a deal because the election board does 99% of the work on those. There has been, a dear friend of mine once was involved in a very hotly contested case involving the rezoning of certain voting districts. And then, of course, you have just your regular zoning cases. I don't want a Walmart in my backyard. And those are the types of cases that are cases that generally will pique the public interest. As a young attorney, I heard the anecdote that for an attorney, any publicity is good publicity. Not certain I agreed with that when I'm an attorney, but I think I speak for my colleagues when I say as a judge, we want no publicity. The last thing we want is to be the lead story on the nightly news. We certainly don't want to be mentioned in the Daily Oklahoman, and God forbid we be above the fold on the Daily Oklahoman. The point that I would make to you all, though, is I know we're talking about public issues here, even the private issues. The vast majority of my docket, and my docket is a civil docket, so it means I'm not doing criminal cases, I'm not doing divorces, I'm not doing juvenile matters, and I don't do trust probate type stuff. So car accident, malpractice, real estate law, anything other than those topics are the type of cases I hear. But what I would say is that I know in the public cases, people have strong opinions one way or the other, but every other case I have is the very same way. Back when I used to do divorces, what could draw stronger emotions from people than to be fighting over the custody of their children? I've done a little bit out at juvenile, and again, what could draw stronger opinions from people than when you're trying to terminate a mother's rights? And you have perhaps foster parents that want to adopt this child. And so I would tell you that I think as far as a judge is concerned, or at least me personally, there is a little difference in my mind if it's going to be a case that may make it to the newspaper or if it's going to be a case that just involves and no one really cares except for the two litigants that are before me. I always tell my jurors when they come in that as we all come into the courtroom with our own life experiences, and as a result of those life experiences, we may view things in a certain manner. We may have a bias or a prejudice, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but for instance, if you're sitting on the jury in my courtroom and the issue has to do, a doctor took out the wrong kidney, and last week a doctor took out the wrong kidney for you or your spouse, you're going to have a bias or prejudice that may affect your ability to hear those cases. And judges are the very same way. We all come into the court with the very same life experiences. We see the very same things that are going on that you all see. And as judges, we have to find a way, the same way the jurors do, to set aside those life experiences and give both sides a fair shot. As a judge, we're not an advocate for either side. We should not be trying to litigate or help either side argue their cases. And we should not ever advocate for a certain position. We have to be neutral. And basically it's asking us to be supermen and women because it's not 100% possible to do that. So all we can do as judges, and I think I say for my colleagues, that is what we all try our hardest to do, whether it's a case that's going to be on the front page of the Daily Oklahoman or whether it's two litigants that no one in the world cares about except for those two litigants. In that regard, I would tell you when we're sworn in as judges, we all have to take an oath, and that oath is that we're going to support, defend, and uphold the Constitution of the state of Oklahoma and the Constitution of the United States. And then in addition to that oath, all judges are governed by the Code of Judicial Ethics. And if we actually have a council on judicial complaints, if there is a violation of that Code of Judicial Ethics. And I want to read you a couple of the things that periodically I'll just read these again just to remind myself of the high duty and the honor that's been bestowed upon me. But 2 or 3 times it will say the judge shall comply with the law. A judge shall promote public confidence in the independence, integrity, and impartiality of the judiciary. Again, apply the law and apply it fairly and impartially. There's another provision that says that we will apply or do our jobs without bias or prejudice, and then it gives a grocery list of the types of things we need to be looking for and be aware of whether we have any bias or prejudice. things like race, sex, gender, religion, national origin, ethnicity, disability, age, sexual orientation, marital status, socioeconomic status, or political affiliation. And then the one rule I think which is most appropriate for what my question is there's a rule that says a judge shall not be swayed by public clamor or fear of criticism. And that's the one that applies probably is the most appropriate for dealing with issues that you know are going to take on their own life because the public is so involved in what's going on. I will tell you, all you can really do as a judge is to try your best to recognize your prejudices and set them to the side. If you can't, you can recuse yourself. You can simply step down from the case and not hear the case. And I'll give you an example. I had a niece that was a victim of domestic violence, and she ended up dying. She was killed as a result of the domestic violence. I don't have a criminal docket, but I pick up criminal cases to try them if I don't have a civil docket. My beliefs on those issues, domestic violence, death penalty, murder, they were all wrapped up in her trial. I have such strong emotions and feelings about what's right and wrong in those areas. I should never, ever be a judge that would hear a case involving those issues. And again, that's a result of the life experiences that I have. The issue about how do we do it differently than you all, or when we are not wearing our black robes, I think the main difference is we have an oath and we have a code of judicial ethics that we have to follow that you all do not have to follow. So what would my advice be to you as non-judges on how to handle issues when you're having these, particularly in today's age, when you're having these discussions about a myriad of different topics? I would just say we all have our own internal moral compasses. And when I was younger, my moral compass was very black or white. You give me an issue and by God, I had an opinion on what was right and what was wrong. And of course, my opinion was always the right opinion. I look back and I think now how I would espouse those opinions, that if I ever had to really defend them, I probably couldn't. It was just, this is how I feel. But then life came along. And as a result of my life experiences, it made me start to look at things separately. And the one example, and I think perhaps one of our judges may be going to talk about this, just generally for the state of Oklahoma. Criminal justice. We've always been a very much hard on crime, lock them up, throw away the keys sort of society. And then years pass and we start seeing through our life experiences what that has done to just have that attitude to lock people up and throw away the key. We realize now the cost involved in doing that. What do we do with all the old people like me that are being locked up that need extra care? And then more importantly, the fact that all the evidence shows that if you can do some sort of treatment program to help these people, whether it be mental health, whether it be drug treatment programs, that the results are going to be much better, not only for the defendant, but for society in general. So I would just give that as an example of a life experience that, by God, at one point in time, throw them up and lock away the key. You know, another thing that might change your mind is you have a very hard stance on criminal justice, but wait until your son or daughter is picked up for possession of marijuana. It's going to make you stop and think about how your position is when real life actually hits you in the face. So to quote Aretha Franklin, I would say RESPECT, treat each other with respect when you're having these arguments, and use my favorite phrase in the courtroom. When I ruled and the counsel doesn't agree with me, I just smile and say, let's just agree to disagree. So thank you very much.
And I think the audience would be interested in hearing you sing that song. You're willing to do that?
I might need a drink or two first.
All right.
Non-alcoholic, of course.
Thank you very much. And feel free to leave whenever you need to.
You know, I'm going to go ahead and step down now just so I don't bother anybody, but I'm going to listen to what Judge Bass has to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's turn to Judge Bass, and you've got the unenviable task of answering these broad questions that were posed. Why should the average person care about justice? doesn't come up very often in our everyday lives. And then where I want you to land eventually is, from your experience, do you think our courts generally get it right through the jury system or even through judicial decisions?
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of becomes a circular argument is, why do we care about justice? But we care about justice because, well, why should we be just, right? Ask that question. But it's enforcement of rules that are to be expected from all of us, whether it's in our community, whether it's in our courts, whether it is in our workplace, where we all have a right to have rules that we expect to abide by. And why do we have those rules? Because they create order to our society. And society has a right to expect what rules to follow. One of the complaints about the justice system, it seems like, is that, well, the wheels of justice turn awful slowly. I hear that complaint from time to time, but they're designed to turn slowly. Because if you're driving down May Avenue one day and the speed limit is 45 miles an hour, and a week later you drive down May Avenue and the speed limit is 35 miles an hour, and then a month later you drive down May Avenue and the speed limit is 50 miles an hour. Well, that just throws society into chaos, and so that's why our wheels of justice have a tendency to move slowly. One of the areas that I'm concerned about in the area of justice is the swiftness of the digital age. They don't seem to have rules that, or their rules kind of flash by in a second. It depends on what can be invented today, changes tomorrow. And so it really doesn't, the digital age really doesn't fit in with our system of justice. So a working definition of justice, Ms. Lathan probably did an awesome job, so I could probably just remain quiet about that. But it's fairness. It's fairness in the workplace. It's fairness in our courts. It's fairness dealing with a police officer that might pull us over to give a speeding ticket. And how many people here everybody got a fair speeding ticket? Show of hands, right. So what we try to do is we try to do what's morally right in any given situation. Judge Parrish alluded to what we have to do as judges. I give you a couple of examples in my courtroom. I had of being treated fairly or with justice, and I had a lawyer in my courtroom that had tried a couple of cases in my courtroom, and he just did not think that he was getting a fair shake. Just did not think that he was getting a fair shake. I swear he was. He was a jerk. He really was. But as a judge, you have to look past that, because it's not about the lawyer. It's about the client. But no matter what I could say to this lawyer, he just was not going to feel like he got a fair shake in my courtroom. And so, after some thought on the subject and talking with another judge who'd been on the bench a lot longer than I had, I quietly called his law partner into my chambers and said, "Look," I said, "no matter what I do, no matter what I say or do, with I won't mention his name, he will never feel like he gets a fair shake. And you know what? It doesn't make any difference whether or not he actually gets a fair shake, but what his or her perception is." And so he had a right to believe that he was getting a fair shake in the courtroom, and so I quietly recused all of his cases and let him go to another courtroom, because if he came to one courtroom, he was convinced he was not going to get treated fairly. What's a working definition of justice? I don't. That's a difficult question to answer. And the best way that I think that I can answer that is that at the conclusion of a trial, if I saw both sides, and I tried criminal cases for the most part, jury trials. If I saw both sides, the prosecution and the defense, fight fairly, put their witnesses on, put their evidence on according to the rules established by the courts and by the evidence, and argue their cases honorably before the jury. On a few occasions, I would stand and after dismissing the jury, I would make that comment. I would make that observation that I said, I don't know that I can ever come up with the definition of justice, but I've seen it happen in this courtroom this week by the example of this prosecutor and this defense attorney fighting both for their respective position and doing it fairly, doing it honorably, and doing it morally and according to the law. And from leading segue into that, do I think that justice is achieved in our courts for the most part? Yes. Do we hear about the case from time to time about some judge has made a decision that you just think that is just nuts? True enough, and I have those thoughts as well. But my faith rests in our system of justice. My faith rests in you fine people out here in the audience, because you fine people get what we call jury summons, and you are asked to come into the courtroom and sit down and be questioned by the lawyers about your ability to be fair and impartial, and if you have any hidden biases, be open about those. Judge Parrish alluded to, and listen to the evidence, and then fairly come up with and reach a decision. You people, and you people are the reason why I have such great faith in our system of justice. Do judges get it right most of the time? I think so. I really believe so. I think you can have faith in judges for the most part. Are there the few exceptions that go off the deep end? Sure, absolutely. But for the vast majority of the time, I think you can have faith in your judges. But more importantly, you people are the backbone of our system of justice. There's three ways that you can go serve your country. You can, as citizens, you can go vote. You can go vote. You can go vote. Right? You can also serve in the armed forces. Never let us forget that even in today's world, there are young men and young women that are being shot at, that people are trying to kill at this very moment, so that we can sit here and enjoy our lunches and talk about justice. And then the third way is to serve as a juror. And is it a privilege? Absolutely. Is it a right? Absolutely, it is. But without you, without jurors, we have a very different form of government. You are what? As jurors, you will tell the government what you will do and what you will not do. You will tell the government what they will do and what they will not do. Without you people, exercising those three rights, those three privileges, we have a very, very different feeling. Okay.
Very good, thank you. And I think Judge Bass made a very good point about, what goes on in the jury during deliberation is really a microcosm in an exercise of ethics, because I'm there as a juror trying to decide what do I think is the right decision, and I'm sitting next to Tony who has a different perspective, and so we have to somehow reconcile our views under the judge's instruction, and it's a really interesting tug and pull on personal ethics when you serve on the jury. So I would, some people talk about, oh, I got jury summons, I got to figure out a way to get out of that. And sometimes I'll get a call from people who say, can you help me get out of jury service? And I always have the same answer, nope. You get to go serve. That's one of the great things about being an American. So, all right, Judge Strong, we're going to talk to you about, as a presiding trial judge, I'm sure you've seen many people that come in your courtroom with misconceptions or misperceptions about justice. So it might be lawyers, hopefully not, but it could be jurors, sometimes witnesses, the parties themselves. So would you give us maybe even some examples or some common misconceptions about justice that you see in the courtroom, and how you straighten those people out?
All right. Can I address something that Judge Bass issued first? He took one of my answers, that the will of justice.
Objection.
But anyway, I think it's really important that we all care about whether justice is done in the courtroom or even without elected officials, because we want everyone to be treated the same regardless of their color, their gender, their economic background. Because one of these days, like Judge Paris stated earlier, it could be your family member. So you want that judge or that county officials to treat everyone the same regardless. So it's important that you hold your elected officials to that standard. But to add to Judge Bass about the will of justice moving slowly, that I hear a lot of complaint about by jurors, is that why does this case take 2 or 3 years to go to the jury? Well, after they render their verdict, I usually tell them, I could get a jury case tried within 2 months within the time they get arrested, but it's hard to get all 4 attorneys together and the witnesses all on the same week to be in the same room. And then also, the longer a defendant delayed his case, the witness tend to die, and witnesses tend to not remember as much. So I have seen defendants, literally saying, well, I'm going to fire this attorney, I'm going to hire another one, and then do it again, and then do it again, because they have a solid case against him, so he just wanted to delay it as much as possible, because the longer it takes for you to go to jury trial, the longer it's going to take for you to go to prison. So that's true. So that's my answer to them. And then the one complaint that I hear a lot is that why do you put a lot of people in prison or in the state of Oklahoma on non-violent crimes? And my answer usually is they have to work really, really, really hard to get to prison if it's a non-violent crime, because I give them chances, and then, how many times does somebody break into your house or somebody's house, and do they get to break in the 3rd time in your house before I get to send them to prison? Or they took somebody's car, and the next car, and it happened to have your wallet in it, and you can't get to work, and then you give them probation, and they can't get it. So it's over and over and over, and for me, and I do see a lot of time that we do have people in jail or prison because they cannot afford to pay their fees or get their probations done because they can't afford the classes, and I do realize that. And also, I am a big supporter of getting people out, and I know Judge Stoner is as well. to get them out on their own recognizance so that way they can get back to their life on their nonviolent crime and get into treatment. So I'll do whatever I can to get that done for them so that way we as the citizen of Oklahoma County don't have to pay for their stay in Oklahoma County jail or pay for the long run that they lost their job, so then we have to pay for their public assistant or, you know, take care of their children while they in DOC custody. But for me, I realize that are people that truly needs help, and then there's people that you just can't help, and I will do whatever I can to get that done. And I know that we have a big support group within Oklahoma County. I see Chief Cities here. I mean, he's a big supporter of trying to not book people into the county jail as much as possible on nonviolent crime or misdemeanor or traffic citation, so that way they can go back to their family or cite and release. So we are very fortunate to have him, his help on that. But
If I can jump in just a second here, Judge. So what I think I hear you saying is one of the misperceptions is that justice, in some people's minds, justice should mean jail time. And I think what I'm hearing you say is you have to really customize justice for people. And then the earlier part, I think you said, is that we all get frustrated sometimes it's so slow, but that sometimes it's out of your control as a judge to affect the speed. But and going back to what Judge Bass said, but there's some logic and reason to have justice proceed not too rapidly in order to make sure people are prepared and they present the best case. So, any other misperceptions or misconceptions that you've seen people come into your courtroom with?
My other complaint that I heard is that when I am presided over a jury trial, jurors always ask, why didn't I get to hear about their priors? If I had known about their priors, I would have convicted him. And I was like, that's exactly why you don't get to hear it, because you get to, you know. And I will share, my time is not up, so I'll share a short, funny story for you. So I was in New York City, and I get a text from Judge Bernard Jones that there's a lady out in the courthouse have a sign against you. And I said, I don't have any disgruntled, plaintiff or defendants. All of my disgruntled defendants are in custody, so they can't be out there with signs. So I do the criminal docket, so a lot of my defendant that's not happy are locked up, but I'll pass mine.
All right, Judge Stoner. I had the privilege of sitting in Judge Stoner's courtroom a week or two ago, and Judge Stoner will explain to you drug court that he presides over. If you have never sat in a drug court proceeding, I would recommend it. It's a really interesting, and it's in most cases it's a celebration of people making progress on their road to beating addictions. So the question I have queued up for you, Your Honor, is you're assigned to drug court. You get to observe both successes and failures in this alternative program. How does the drug court promote greater community interest in justice? And what do you say to people who think those who are arrested for drug-related offenses should be locked up and the key thrown away?
Right. I think these were treated harshly. Right. First of all, thank you for having this panel. Thank you for inviting us here. This group sponsoring this, we need to have these kind of discussions about what's going on at the courthouse and how it affects our community. So thank you, Shannon, for having this. But I would start with some of the things that our offenders should be treated more harshly. I would say, well, there was a point in time where I used to share that belief. I spent my first 6 years of my career as a prosecutor, worked under West Lane, tried cases in front of Judge Bass, and Judge Strong here, she was a colleague of mine in the district attorney's office. And there really was a perception it was an us versus them. And what we're trying to do is make the community safe. It's very well intentioned. And the way that you made the community safe is, as people that continue to break the law, that was accountability. That's what it was. And so now, and to Judge Trung's point, whenever people talk about nonviolent offenders, she's talking about that's the people that break into people's houses and steal your Xbox and your DVD player and, you know, wreak havoc in your life. And so there is this perception, well, they're a nonviolent offender, we should just, you know, give them a free pass or just give them treatment. And that's actually irresponsible. It's very irresponsible because they do wreak a lot of havoc in our community. But it doesn't mean, it depends on what the underlying issue that got them to that point, why are they doing what they're doing? And that's really where this justice and fairness concept comes in. So I preside over our drug courts, and I do have a different view. I mean, and so there is absolutely a place for incarceration in prison for a lot of people, and in many cases, it's most violent offenders. That's just the right thing to do for community safety and public safety. That's what we have to do. However, if you'll notice that over the last couple of decades, the prison population has just exploded. And the reason it exploded because if you'll also track the explosion of addiction in our society, they track along with one another. And so a lot of our increase in our incarceration rates have been due to addiction. Now, just to throw some numbers at you, about 75% of all the criminal cases at our courthouse, addiction, substance use, and abuse is a dominant factor. 75%. Down in our courthouse, this is on the family law dockets. You talk to any family law judge, they'll tell you substance use, abuse, addiction is a relevant factor in about 50% of all divorces. If you go out to our juvenile center, where we have adjudicate deprived or delinquent children, that's where the state intervenes and takes custody of a child. They go to Department of Human Services custody. 83% of those cases are driven by substance abuse and addiction. So, addiction, in my view, is the public health crisis of our time. I know whenever I was growing up in the 80s, AIDS and HIV was the public health crisis, and well, that was obviously it's horrible. We recognize it as a disease. We started asking questions, how does it happen? And we've largely conquered that in a way. Now, the difference between addiction and HIV today is staggering. A year ago, October, our U.S. Surgeon General issued the first ever report on addiction, and it was nothing short of staggering. 23 million Americans meet the diagnostic criteria for a substance abuse disorder. 23 million Americans. That's Oklahoma times 7. That's every man, woman, and child in Oklahoma times 7. There's 63 million people in the United States that are on the edge of or live a high-risk lifestyle. A lot of binge drinking, they consume illicit substances, misuse prescribed substances, and so 63 million people are at high risk for having a substance abuse disorder. So those are also the people that end up at the courthouse, okay? Now, whenever I was in law school, guess how many classes I had on addiction? None. As a matter of fact, right now you can even go to the Bar Center and you know how many continuing education classes right now we have on addiction? None. It is the issue that is driving most of the criminal behavior, a lot of the family law, a lot of our deprived children. Yet, it's now we're realizing things have got to change. If we're going to do something different, the way to make a dent in this is to try to find those ones that are substance abuse issues that are driving their behavior and try to find a suitable alternative. And that's what I do. I was recently appointed to District Judge in Oklahoma County. I preside over our diversion courts, our DUI court, our drug court, and these are programs that I work with what they call high risk, high need offenders. So someone who's been charged with a crime, that they're high risk, means they're high risk or commit a new offense, and they also have a severe substance abuse disorder. It's about 75% of the people in the drug courts are in that program. And you got to plead guilty to get in the program, and you're actually given a prison sentence if you don't complete the program. But it really is the future of our criminal justice, is because it's where accountability and treatment meet, because there is accountability there, and there is treatment where it's an 18 to 24 month program. You have to do UAs, usually about your analysis has. So you got to come in and take UAs 10 times a month, every month for 18 months. And you're accountable to go to treatment, you're accountable to follow certain rules. And we have a graduated sanction program that is based off of evidence-based practices. And evidence-based practices is what we've all got to, we've got to get to. A couple things on touching on fairness and justice, which really, whenever this is what it's about for me, is that if you go back just the last 10 years, there has been an explosion of research on neurophysiology, brain development, what's going on in that 6 inches between our ears that causes us to do what we do, things that we didn't know before, okay? Whenever we get that knowledge, and once we know, that creates a different burden on us as a court. And it creates a different burden on leaders to understand that perhaps some people do things that they do that really isn't really their choice. Or I should say the choice isn't really quite as clear as we used to like to think it was, that they do this and therefore they're doing it of their own volition. So, for example, anybody that studies addiction will tell you it's usually at the intersection of childhood trauma, genetics. There is 5 different genetic markers that make someone predisposed to addictive behavior, self-medicating mental illnesses, and of course, who you were born to, where you were born, how you were brought up, the community you went to, all things that you don't choose. Now, these are still things that live in our society. We still expect you to meet a certain level of behavior, and I'm for that, but some people talk about rehabilitation. In some cases, we're starting out with habilitation. They're for the first time learning how to live in the world in my court, because we use science for an evidence-based practice to modify behavior, and that's what we've got to get, in my view, a lot of our criminal justice system shifted to is an evidence-based model for behavior modification. I'll give you one of my favorite examples. Judge Bass here, for example, he loves to speed. He drives too fast. We know this because he likes to pretend like the speed limit changes, and it doesn't change. It's always the same. I thought it was 55 here. But but if you think about it for a minute, if every single time you were speeding, every single time you got a ticket, and how long would you be speeding? As a matter of fact, once you get a ticket for speeding, you're actually really good for about 30 days, 45 days. And then after that, you're like, I'll be okay. You start going a little bit faster. But when it comes to behavior modification, we have swift and certain accountability. Swift means it's quickly, and certain means you're going to get a sanction. You don't have to knock their head off necessarily, but you've got to have a swift and certain accountability for program violations, for not passing your UAs, not making your UAs. And in our criminal justice system, one of the problems is since it takes so long, if you're working on behavior modification, what is swift and what's certain about it? And that's the power of these diversion courts. Our diversion courts, I believe, are the future. And just to throw some numbers at you, our diversion courts, they're funded by the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. They charge to put somebody through the drug court, it's about $5,000 a year. It's an 18-month program, so you got a year and a half. $5,000. Prison, $19,000 to $20,000 per year. Okay. Our recidivism rate around 8%. Now, when you look at prison, it's somewhere about 50% are rearrested within the first year. I think 3 years, the number comes around 68%. 76% of everyone that's been to prison is rearrested within 5 years. Okay, so, and this is a very pragmatic conversation here. So, all things aside, if you're thinking about, given the fact that most of the people that go to prison come back and live in our community, they're going to come back and live next to us. Most of them do that, okay? What is it that we expect from incarceration? What do we expect to happen there? And are we getting what we want? My suggestion is that prison is a graduate school for criminality. They go there and they come back worse than they went in. So, again, don't hear me say that I'm not talking about people. There are definitely people that need to go to prison. Don't misunderstand me. But there is a certain segment of our population that's the ones that we get frustrated with, and it's typically the addicts because, frankly, they're a difficult population to work with. Their brains don't work well, okay? In 1998, there was a paper that was published in a medical journal that was peer-reviewed that said addiction is a brain disease and why it matters. It was 1998. Since then, we've had even a lot more research, a lot more evidence, and the evidence is piling up that this is more of a brain disease. It's a brain disease that affects prefrontal cortex, that takes it offline. That's where you do your higher level thinking, your judgment, impulse control. It doesn't work well in some people. In some people, it doesn't work well. And you add on top of that, your childhood trauma, genetics, or self-medicating mental illnesses, and they get caught in this loop. And so, anyway, that's again, anybody that ever wants to come visit drug court, I'd love to have you. We have.
As a spectator.
What's that?
As a spectator?
If you're struggling, I'll straighten you out. As a spectator, for sure. But, yeah, if anybody wants to come, I'd love to have you. I think my time's up, but thank you.
Just real brief, I forgot that I had this, but I preside over Remerge, which is a female diversion program to divert women from prison who have children. And I wish I would have given this to you earlier, Jim. But you just kind of hold that up. Some of you will be able to see that. This is one of our ladies that went through Remerge. We've seen her picture in the newspaper, right? And there she is again. She's breaking into my house, over and over again. And that was her. And then this is her recent picture. She now works for, Ariel now works for, in the HR department of Tapstone Energy. She has regained custody of her 3-year-old child. And as we all know, once children go into the foster system and on and on and on, their chances of going into criminality are just exponential. This is a picture of Ariel today. This is what Judge Stoner's talking about. This is what I'm talking about. She's a beautiful young lady. So she's the face of justice.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. I think Judge Bass addressed this a little bit in his remarks, but what can we as average citizens do to advance the cause of justice? You mentioned voting, serving in the military, serving on a jury. Are there other things, other opportunities where we could be engaged in our everyday lives or perhaps as a special volunteer mission?
Ms. Ron? I would suggest that when it comes to our legislators and our vote that Judge Bass talking about, we need to insist upon evidence-based practices. What is the evidence showing us? What's working, what's not working, and insist upon evidence-based practices. Because I'm telling you, in the criminal justice world, we've been kind of doing a lot of what we feel like. I feel like this is the right number for this sentence, and that's the right number for that sentence. And it's not always been well informed, and especially when it comes to those in that addiction space. The addiction is the underlying issue. They go to court. Judges frankly, we don't know a lot about. We're just now learning about addiction. But imagine a situation that if you were, God forbid you have cancer, but if you were to go to the hospital with cancer and they said, well, no, the doctor that's going to treat you, he's never had any training in it, he's never had any experience in it. He's going to decide what to do with and to you. And the way he usually decides is he reads a report prepared by somebody else and ignores most of it, does what he feels like. That's kind of how we've done our system for a long time. And I do think we're at a watershed moment right now where we're understanding that addiction is the issue. We're becoming more informed about it. But we have to get disciplined and kind of moving away from our stronger biases and just default like jail's going to cure something. We've got to have reform in our jails too. But I'd say insist on evidence-based practices.
And I think our system need funding. I mean, the police department need funding, the DA's office need funding, the PD's office need funding, because right now what we have is a system where the defendant have to pay all the fees that support the court system. They pay the 991 fees to go to the DA's office. They pay the court costs to go to the judge's judicial system, and then all that. And these are the group of people that have nothing. So what do? They go out and commit more crimes to pay these fines and fees. So we do need to get people on board to, if there's some, call your legislature. And I think I'm not supposed to be political, but I just want to, it's important because everybody, we are the one who have to suffer, because if we have all these people in DOC, when they get out, they're going to reoffend. So if we have treatment program for them, then hopefully they won't go out and reoffend. So this all go to the cause and effect. So hopefully that we were able to help shed some light on this system.
Well, I think maybe the best way to summarize it is be informed and be engaged, look for opportunities, and to be aware of the ethical implications of the justice system, whether it's the criminal justice system or the civil justice system. There are ethical issues involved, whether we're serving as jurors or simply as observers. I want to close with one quick story that I always think of when I think of justice, and then Paco Valderrama from the Oklahoma City PD is going to come and conclude us. But I heard, and I think this is a legitimate story. There's a lot of stories I hear around the courthouse you wonder about, but I think this is true. A federal judge was pulling into the parking lot some years ago, and there was a fella in front of him, and he couldn't figure out how to make the gate go up. And so he was fooling around. The judge was just late for a hearing, and so he tapped on his horn very gently to urge the guy to figure this out and get through. And the guy turned around and flipped the judge off. And upset the judge a little bit, but finally the guy got through the gate, the judge got to his parking spot, ran up the stairs, got his judge's robe on, went out into the courtroom for a criminal sentencing. Wait for it. And who was the criminal being sentenced that morning? But the guy who flipped him off. And the judge later remarked, "And they say there is no justice." Paco?
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, Shannon, for inviting me today. So I have the very difficult task of closing a very, very informative panel. And, I could really relate to the story that Ms. Latham talked about, the monkeys and the fairness. I have 3 small children. They're 4, 6, and 7, and I could just envision them throwing the food back at me, yelling about this isn't fair. So we know that life isn't fair, and the criminal justice system is as fair as it can be. But I really want to close this with 2 concepts, and it's basically discretion and grace. One of the best things about being a police officer is that we do have a certain amount of discretion in certain cases. Now, if you get pulled over and you have a dead body in your trunk, there's not a whole lot of discretion in that scenario. There's not a whole lot we can do for you other than arrest you and take you to jail. But there's a lot of discretion when it comes to misdemeanor crimes and treating people as individuals. And I looked up justice, and the Hebrew word for justice is mishap, which is to treat people with equitability or with fairness. And that's something that we can do every day. One of the best lines that I remember when I was a 20 years ago, when I was a rookie in the police academy, is that they taught us to always think, is my action to the betterment of the community? If I pull over a minivan with a soccer mom who has 3 kids in car seats, and she forgot about to pay a ticket and her license suspended, I can take her to jail because she's driving suspension. But is that the best thing to do in that situation? And that's where discretion comes in. Absolutely, it's not. It would traumatize the children. It would be just really a complete waste of time, being that that's such a small misdemeanor crime. The best thing to do is probably find somebody to drive a car and find a way for her to take her children back home and let her know about the warrant so she can go take care of it. Maybe even cite her. So that's discretion. That's the best part of our job. That's how we can treat people with fairness. That's how we can make the world a little bit more fair than it is. And one of my favorite lines out of a movie, Lord of the Rings, and it goes something like this. Many that live deserve death. Some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? You know, that's the concept of fairness. That's the concept of justice. And we know, again, that our Constitution creates an environment where this is about as fair as it can get, but it's not always fair. But we can always treat people with grace and a little bit of dignity. Thank you very much.